Hey guys, tonight we're going to wander back into the shadows of medieval medicine, where herbs, prayers, and a little bit of wishful thinking were all you had to keep you alive. Imagine stepping into a small, smoky hut at the edge of a village, where a healer grinds roots and whispers half-remembered charms, promising that your cough will vanish if you just drink this steaming, oddly green concoction. Honestly, you probably wouldn't last a single week under this system. Modern cold medicine suddenly feels like luxury, so before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And let me know in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is. I always find it oddly soothing to picture people listening across different corners of the world. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The smell hits you first, pungent, earthy, with a hint of sweetness that almost masks the bitterness underneath. You're in a dim room where dried herbs hang in bunches from the rafters: sage, thyme, lavender, and stranger leaves you can't quite place. A monk in rough brown robes leans over a wooden mortar, pounding away at roots with steady rhythm, as if each thud carries some ancient power. The walls are lined with jars, some filled with powders, others with liquids in cloudy hues. You can't help thinking it looks a little less like a hospital and more like an experimental kitchen. The people who work these spaces aren't doctors in the sense you'd know today. Sometimes they're monks, sworn to both God and a surprisingly extensive herb garden. Other times they're village women, midwives, or local healers who inherited knowledge passed down like whispered family recipes. The remedies they craft are mixtures of observation, tradition, and, let's be honest, a healthy dose of guessing. A crushed root here for fevers, a sprig of mint for stomachaches, a handful of nettles to purify the blood. You sip it, hesitantly, and the taste is somewhere between tea and lawn clippings. Some of these treatments actually help. Willow bark, ground into powder, works against pain and fever. It's the medieval ancestor of aspirin. Lavender in your bedding might calm nerves and ease sleep. Peppermint could soothe a twisted gut after a questionable meal of boiled turnips. But then there are the more questionable concoctions. Herbs mixed with animal fat, potions that glow faintly green, or roots tied in little pouches worn against the skin to scare away evil humors. Try explaining that at your next doctor's appointment. The logic behind it is simple but strangely poetic. The natural world is full of hidden cures, if only you know where to look. Monks keep careful notes, sketching plants into manuscripts, annotating which leaf helps, which ache. You imagine them bent over candlelight, scribbling with ink-stained fingers, while outside wolves howl and villagers pray the winter fevers pass quickly. Their gardens are neatly arranged, with sage and rosemary planted in careful rows, each leaf both seasoning and salvation. But there's danger too. Some herbs blur the line between remedy and poison. Hemlock could be mistaken for parsley. Foxglove, with its delicate purple flowers, might steady a failing heart or stop it entirely. You picture yourself handed a cup of cloudy liquid, the healer smiling reassuringly, while you wonder if this is medicine or your last drink on earth. The suspense is part of the cure, apparently, and it's not all plants. A healer might mix in powdered antlers, bits of bone, or even dried insects. Medieval medicine loved balance. The four humors had to be kept in harmony: blood, phlegm, black bile, yellow bile. If you're too hot, you need something cooling. Too melancholic, maybe a dash of saffron for cheer. You take a sip of broth, seasoned with herbs and a pinch of optimism, and you try not to think about how much of this is science versus straight-up superstition. Still, there's a quiet comfort in the ritual. The grinding of herbs, the slow boiling of roots, the smell of rosemary wafting through a chill stone corridor feels less like medicine and more like being cared for, even if the outcome is uncertain. The healer's hands, rough from years in the garden, move with a confidence born of repetition. Whether or not the potion works, the act of being seen, of being treated, soothes something deeper than a fever. Historians still debate how much of this early medicine was effective, how much was placebo, and how much was sheer accident. But, standing here, wrapped in the smoky scent of herbs, you realize it didn't matter as much as you'd think. People believed in it. They trusted the earth and those who knew how to coax its secrets. And that belief alone could carry someone through another night of fever, another day of pain. You sit by the hearth as the healer pours your potion into a wooden cup. The steam curls upward, mixing with the dim candlelight. You lift it slowly, breathe in the sharp, grassy scent, and let the liquid touch your lips. Bitter, almost unbearable, but you swallow. Around you, the chants of monks echo softly through stone halls, mingling with the sound of pestles grinding roots. For a moment, you feel tethered between earth and spirit, body and belief. And whether or not it truly heals, the ritual itself feels like medicine. The cup of bitter herbs is barely settled in your stomach when the healer leans closer, eyes narrowed in judgment. According to the wisdom of the age, it isn't enough to sip roots and hope for the best. No, your entire body is thought to be ruled by 4 invisible forces: blood, phlegm, yellow bile, and black bile. Together they swirl inside you like moody roommates, and the slightest imbalance could be the reason for your cough, your sadness, or that mysterious ache in your ribs. It sounds more like a bad astrology chart than medicine, but here, in this dim chamber, it is treated as unshakable truth. You're told that if you have too much blood, you're feverish, rash, maybe even too energetic. The cure: take some of that blood out, and so you're guided to a wooden stool while the healer unwraps a small, gleaming knife. The edge catches the candlelight in a way that makes your stomach twist. A shallow cut is made at the crook of your arm, and warm drops slide down into a waiting bowl. The sound is faint, but you feel each drop leave you, as if your strength is being ladled out, spoonful by spoonful. You try to laugh, but your voice comes out thin. Imagine going to the doctor today and being told, "Yes, you're too full of blood. Let's just let some out." Sometimes the process is done with leeches instead, sleek, wriggling creatures, placed carefully on your skin. Their mouths latch on, pulling away tiny rivers of red. It's unpleasant, slimy, and not exactly the spa treatment you'd sign up for. But there's a strange serenity in watching the leeches bloat like small, living balloons. The healer murmurs reassurance. Balance is being restored. You can't help wondering whether the leeches are the healthiest creatures in the room. Diet, too, is pressed into service of these humors. If you're too melancholic, you're advised to eat warm, moist foods: figs, chicken broth, sweet wine. Too choleric, too fiery, cool cucumbers, chilled water, light bread. It's not exactly the food pyramid, but it gives your meals a sort of mystical logic. You picture a medieval household fretting over whether cabbage might cause phlegm to rise, or whether onions will tilt the balance toward bile. Suddenly, the idea of someone counting calories feels almost modern and rational in comparison. There's a ritualistic beauty to it all, in a strange way. The healer's tools, bowls, knives, cloths are laid out in careful order, like relics of a sacred rite. The act of bleeding isn't rushed. It's done with murmured words, the careful catching of liquid in a clay vessel, the wiping away of excess with a linen cloth. You find yourself almost lulled by the rhythm of it, the hush of the room broken only by the soft trickle of your own vitality leaving you. And yet, not all results are peaceful. Too much blood lost, and patients swoon, their faces pale, lips colorless, some never wake again. Still, the logic persists. If 1 ounce of blood is good, surely 2 is better. You can almost hear the collective shrug of history saying, well, they looked balanced in the end. There are stranger remedies too, meant to tip the humors without a blade. Drinking vinegar mixed with crushed pearls, swallowing ground up coral, or eating clay to dry the excess moisture. You wrinkle your nose at the thought of chewing a spoonful of mud, while the healer nods gravely, as though you are consuming wisdom itself. What's striking is the certainty. No one doubts the system. The 4 humors explain everything: headaches, heartbreaks, even personality quirks. A sanguine person is warm and social. Too much blood makes them laugh too loudly at feasts. A choleric soul burns with anger. Too much yellow bile fuels their temper. It's a world view where the body, the mind, and the stars all dance in step. Even if your own body feels like it's limping out of rhythm, historians still debate whether these treatments offered real relief, or whether the comfort came mostly from belief, the sense that someone understood what was wrong. Even if they didn't, you think about the faint scar that will remain on your arm, a reminder of the night your health was poured into a bowl. Oddly enough, the wound doesn't sting as much as the thought that this was once the height of medical science. As you press the cloth to your arm, the healer tells you to rest, to eat light, to trust that balance will return. Outside, the night air is cool, the stars spread across the sky like a celestial chart of your humors. You wonder if the heavens really do guide the bile in your stomach, or if you're simply tired, bleeding, and oddly comforted by the order of it all. The cloth is still pressed to your arm, faintly sticky with blood, when the scene around you shifts from the quiet hush of a healer's hut to the clamor of a medieval town. The air is louder here, market calls, horse hooves on cobblestone, and somewhere in the middle of it, a wooden sign sways above a small shop. It shows the red and white pole you've come to know as a barber's mark. But step inside, and you quickly realize this is more than just a place for a trim and a shave. The barber greets you with the easy charm of a man who has seen far too many mouths open wide and far too many heads split open to flinch at either. His tools are laid out on the counter, gleaming razors for hair, sturdy pliers for teeth, and needles threaded with coarse string for sewing up gashes that come from tavern fights or accidents with a plough. The room smells of soap, sweat, and the faint copper temps of blood. You hesitate because isn't this supposed to be a haircut? You sit in the chair, its wood worn smooth by countless uneasy bodies. Someone in the corner groans while the barber tugs at a molar with all the determination of a farmer pulling a stubborn root. The crowd outside pays little attention. In fact, this shop is a one-stop solution. You can walk in shaggy-haired and toothacheing, and walk out clean-shaven, gap-toothed, and stitched up like a patchwork quilt. It's multitasking, medieval style. The barber surgeon doesn't waste words. With a quick tilt of your chin, he snaps the razor open and begins his work. The scrape of steel against skin is steady, almost soothing. Except when you remember the same blade was probably used on a wound an hour ago. Sterilization isn't a word anyone here knows. At best, he rinses his tools in a bowl of cloudy water. At worst, he wipes them on his apron and carries on, humming a tune that sounds entirely too cheerful for the job at hand. If your tooth aches, he leans close, grips the offending ivory with iron tongs, and pulls with a sharp, brutal yank. There's no numbing agent, no gentle encouragement, just raw force. Pain blossoms, bright and immediate, and then it's done. He drops the tooth in a small jar, a trophy of sorts, and pats your shoulder as if you've merely survived a spirited game. You try to smile, but the corner of your mouth is numb with shock. When it comes to wounds, his hands are quick and practiced. A gash across a forearm is pulled together with thick stitches, knotted tight. He works like a tailor who happens to be stitching living cloth, muttering that it'll hold fine if you don't pick at it. You watch as his fingers move, deft in their rough way, and you realize there's a kind of comfort in his blunt confidence. He doesn't promise miracles, only that you'll leave the shop more whole than when you entered. This blending of grooming and surgery isn't strange here, it's expected. Hair grows, teeth rot, skin tears, and someone has to keep all of it in working order. Why not the man already skilled with sharp blades? In a world where university-trained physicians are rare and expensive, the barber is practical, accessible, and endlessly adaptable. He may not know much about humors or stars, but he knows how to stop bleeding, remove what's rotten, and leave you standing. There's a strange camaraderie in this shop too. Men wait their turn, swapping stories, laughing nervously at the sight of bloodied cloths. Children peer through the doorway, fascinated and horrified all at once. For many, this is the closest thing to medical care they'll ever know, and it comes with a haircut thrown in. You sit back, freshly shorn, a little lighter in the jaw, and marvel at the sheer efficiency of it all. Historians still debate just how skilled these barber surgeons truly were. Some argue they saved countless lives with their quick hands. Others point out the risks: infection, shock, or simply the trauma of a procedure performed without anesthetic. But watching the barber toss your tooth into his collection and wipe his brow, you can't help but feel he occupies a strange, vital place in the story of medicine. When you step outside, the town's clamor rushes back in. The barber's pole sways gently, its spirals said to symbolize the blood and bandages of his trade. You walk away with a fresh haircut, a sore jaw, and a stitch or two, half amused that your grooming and survival both hinged on the same pair of hands. The sun dips lower, casting long shadows on the cobblestones, and you feel the town itself hum with the strange blend of necessity and improvisation that defines this age. The lively chatter of the marketplace fades, and in its place creeps a heavy silence, the kind that clings to entire cities when fear becomes the dominant sound. The plague has arrived, though no one quite knows how. Rats scuttle along the cobblestones, fleas bite unnoticed, and suddenly the town you walk through yesterday feels more like a graveyard in waiting. Windows are shuttered, doorways marked, and the air itself seems weighed down by dread. You step into a chapel where incense burns thick, curling up toward the rafters like ghostly ribbons. The smell is overpowering sweet, smoky, almost suffocating. It's meant to purify the air, to drive away the unseen corruption people believe lurks in every breath. Monks sway as they chant, their voices low and trembling, while townsfolk clutch charms of bone, bronze, or painted wood against their chests. Every cough in the shadows makes you stiffen. Every sneeze feels like the tolling of a bell. Prayer is the first medicine here, the one everyone turns to when explanations fail. Knees press into cold stone floors, lips murmur desperate bargains with heaven. If only the saints will intercede, if only God will lift his hand, the sickness will pass. The sound of whispered pleas mixes with the toll of church bells that ring both for prayer and for funerals. The line between hope and mourning blurs until it's impossible to tell whether people are praying for life or for a gentle death. Outside, the remedies grow stranger. Healers burn herbs in the streets, creating smoky clouds that sting the eyes but are said to chase away the bad air. People hang bundles of fragrant flowers around their necks, stuff their pockets with rosemary, lavender, or marigolds. Children skip through the smoke, not knowing whether they're dancing through a cure or just perfumed despair. You can almost imagine the town itself trying to mask its illness, like a patient painting rouge on pale cheeks. And then there are the charms rings etched with Latin inscriptions, amulets containing bits of scripture, even dried toads sewn into pouches too. Ward off the plague. You finger one of these talismans and wonder how much comfort comes from the object itself and how much from simply believing in it. After all, when the world feels out of control, even a pebble in your pocket can feel like armor. The rituals grow more elaborate as fear deepens. Processions wind through the streets, barefoot penitents whipping themselves raw, chanting hymns of sorrow, convinced that suffering will draw divine mercy. You stand in the crowd, watching them stagger forward, their backs streaked with crimson lines under the torchlight. It's not a cure, but it is a spectacle of desperation, a theater of belief. You can't decide if it's terrifying or heartbreaking, perhaps both, and yet, despite the prayers, the charms, the incense, the plague does not relent. Bodies pile up faster than graves can be dug. Whole households vanish, leaving doors swinging open, their silence more haunting than any chant. You find yourself clutching your own makeshift charm, a sprig of thyme wrapped in cloth, knowing full well it may be as effective as wishing on a star. Still, you hold it tighter. Historians still debate the role of these rituals. Were they purely symbolic? Or did some incense and herbs genuinely make the air less dangerous? Could prayer and community processions have offered psychological relief that eased the suffering, even if they didn't cure it? Perhaps both answers are true. What's certain is that in times of plague, the line between medicine and magic blurred completely, leaving only faith to fill the gaps. As night falls, the town is wrapped in smoke and silence. Candles burn low in windows, casting halos of light against the dark. You step back into the chapel one last time, where the air is thick with incense and whispered prayers. The scent clings to your clothes, a mix of comfort and futility, and as you close your eyes, you realize that sometimes medicine, in this age, wasn't about healing the body at all. It was about calming the soul enough to endure the night. The air outside the chapel still clings to you, smoky with incense and heavy with the scent of wilted flowers. When you're led into a quieter chamber where the healer is not bending over herbs or sharpening a blade, but instead gazing upward at the night sky, the room is dim, lit only by a single candle and a faint spill of moonlight through a narrow window. On the table lies not a bowl of potions or a bundle of leeches, but a chart of the stars, carefully drawn with circles, lines, and mysterious symbols. It seems medicine tonight is not in the hands of earth, but of heaven. You sit while the physician, robed in somber colors, tells you that the stars have an opinion about your health, your fever, your aches, even your occasional toothache. They are all written somewhere in that sprawling tapestry above. You try not to roll your eyes, because apparently even your digestion is the business of the constellations. Imagine explaining that to your boss today. Sorry, I can't come in. Mercury is giving me indigestion. It isn't just idle superstition. Surgeries are timed with the phases of the moon. Remedies are chosen based on the alignment of planets. If Mars hovers in a particular house, bloodletting is dangerous. If Venus is in the ascendant, certain herbs gain potency. You're told it would be foolish reckless even to undergo a procedure without consulting the heavens. After all, who wants to tempt fate by having a tooth pulled when Saturn is in a foul mood? A popular event in the town square is watching astrologer-physicians trace the skies, their fingers mapping routes between stars as though drawing roads on a celestial atlas. People crowd around, clutching charts, desperate to know when it's safe to drink a tonic, when it's best to rest, when to avoid traveling altogether. In a world where disease seems random and unstoppable, the stars at least offer a kind of order, a sense that there's a cosmic rhythm behind your cough. Here's the part that might surprise you. Astrological medicine wasn't only about surgery or potions. Even bloodletting, the ever-popular medieval pastime, was guided by what star sign ruled which part of the body. Aries was linked with the head, Leo with the heart, Pisces with the feet. So if you had a splitting headache and the moon was in Aries, well, bad news. You'd best wait, because cutting into anything owned by Aries would be disastrous. You can picture the awkwardness of that advice. Yes, I know your skull is cracked, but the moon says give it a few days. And yet, this wasn't a fringe belief. Kings and queens consulted their court astrologers before surgeries. Town physicians defended their celestial charts as fiercely as their herbals. Even the most serious scholars wrote entire manuals linking constellations to cures. Historians still debate whether this was genuine science in its own time or simply an elegant illusion, a way to make sense of illness when real explanations were out of reach. You lean back, listening as the physician explains that your own ailment is likely tied to the imbalance of Saturn's influence. He advises waiting 3 nights before taking your next tonic, and warns against walking barefoot when Jupiter is low in the sky. You're tempted to ask whether your horoscope also predicts if you'll ever get a good night's sleep again, but you bite your tongue. After all, this man controls the prescriptions. The star charts themselves are works of art, painted with indigo and gold. They glitter faintly even in the low candlelight, constellations marked like tiny jeweled secrets. There's a hushed reverence in the way the physician points to Orion or Libra, as though these distant fires are whispering medical advice across the ages. And you can't help but be drawn into it. Even you, skeptical and weary, feel a strange comfort imagining your sickness as part of a grander cosmic puzzle, rather than a cruel twist of chance. The truth, of course, is that sometimes the timing worked, but often it did not. Patients still grew feverish, wounds still festered, coughs still turned deadly, no matter how carefully the stars were consulted. Yet belief carried its own power. Sitting under the vast night sky, you might convince yourself you're tethered to something immense. And maybe that belief is strong enough to steady your breathing for a while. There's even a lighter side to all this. Some medieval households owned astrological almanacs filled with not only health advice, but also tips for planting crops, choosing marriage dates, or predicting personality traits. It's comforting to imagine a family flipping through their almanac like a cosmic instruction manual. Don't bleed, Uncle Jeffrey, today. Venus is in retrograde, but it's a perfect time to pickle cabbage. When the consultation ends, the physician folds his chart carefully, tucks it under one arm, and bids you farewell with the solemnity of someone who believes the heavens themselves have spoken through him. You step outside, and the sky is spread wide above you, cool and glittering. The stars look no different than they did before, but you find yourself staring a little longer, searching for patterns you'll never truly understand. The night air feels gentler now, carrying a chill that pricks your skin but clears your thoughts. Perhaps it's the charm of believing, even if only for a moment, that sickness and healing are written in the stars. And as you walk back through the cobblestone streets, you can almost convince yourself the constellations are watching, keeping their mysterious counsel until morning. The candlelight flickers low as you step into the cool stone halls of a monastic hospital. It doesn't feel like a place of science so much as a sanctuary of patience. The air smells faintly of beeswax and damp stone, mingled with the soft sweetness of herbs drying in bundles overhead. Voices echo quietly, not the frantic cries of surgeons or the barking orders of physicians, but murmured prayers recited in rhythm, like a lullaby intended more for the soul than for the body. You are shown to a narrow cot, its straw mattress rustling beneath you as you settle. A monk with kind but weary eyes places a wooden bowl in your hands. The broth inside is warm, almost comforting, though it has little chance of chasing away the fever clawing at your chest. Still, the gesture itself eases you Bukowskia. The act of being cared for might matter more than whether the treatment works. The hospital is a curious mixture of chapel and infirmary. Candles line the walls like silent guardians, their wax dripping steadily, marking the passage of suffering in molten trails. At the far end of the hall, a crucifix looms large, reminding every patient that salvation is valued as highly as medicine. For many, this is not only a place of healing, but also a waiting room for eternity. And yet, strangely, there's comfort. In that duality, sickness is treated both as an earthly malady and as part of a larger spiritual journey. Nursing here is not performed by physicians with sharp instruments, but by monks and nuns whose training lies as much in scripture as in remedies. They bathe your forehead with cool cloths. They whisper psalms into your ear. They light incense that fills the room with a fragrance halfway between sacred and suffocating. You realize quickly that they do not measure success by survival rates. Instead, they measure it by whether your soul feels lighter, whether your prayers are steadier, whether your passing, if it comes, is gentler. And yet, even in this solemn place, life persists. Patients share quiet conversations, comparing the taste of their broths like gourmets of thin soup, laughing softly at the squeak of a mouse darting across the rafters. A woman to cots down mutters that the prayers seem to work better at night when the candlelight makes everything glow. A man, his arm wrapped in cloth, jokes that he came in for a wound but stayed for the singing. Humor here is as precious as medicine, and sometimes just as effective. A lesser-known truth about these hospitals is that they were among the first places where organized care was offered freely, at least in spirit. Many who arrived here were poor, unable to afford the services of town physicians or barber surgeons. The monasteries opened their doors, offering shelter and basic treatment, creating an early form of communal health care. Of course, basic treatment often meant prayers and herbs rather than effective cures, but the intention itself shaped communities for centuries. The building itself becomes part of the therapy. The vaulted ceilings echo with hymns that seem to stretch to heaven. The stone walls cool against fevered skin. The courtyard outside filled with medicinal gardens, where monks harvest fennel, sage, and rue. You watch one of them carry in a basket of fresh herbs, his sandals scuffing the flagstones, his lips moving in constant prayer. The rhythm of daily devotion lulls you more effectively than any draught of medicine. Historians still debate whether these hospitals truly advanced medical practice or merely preserved souls. Some argue that by sheltering the sick, they slowed the spread of disease and offered genuine relief. Others suggest they were more hospice than hospital, easing the final days rather than fighting for recovery. What seems certain is that they stood as places where compassion outweighed clinical precision, where the line between healing and holy blurred until it was nearly invisible. Lying back on your cot, you let the sounds wash over you, the shuffle of sandals on stone, the low hum of prayers, the faint drip of water somewhere deep within the walls. The discomfort in your body doesn't vanish, but it softens, tucked beneath layers of ritual and care. You realize that for many who passed through these halls, the greatest cure offered was not freedom from illness, but the simple gift of not suffering alone. The candle beside your bed flickers once, then steadies. The monk who brought your broth pauses to adjust the blanket around your shoulders, his hands gentle, his face unreadable in the shifting light. And for a moment, you let yourself believe that this place, with its mix of stone and scripture, is enough. That sometimes healing isn't measured by whether you rise in the morning, but by whether you can rest tonight. The stone corridors of the monastery fade behind you, and suddenly you're carried into another world, one that smells not of broth and candle wax, but of cinnamon, pepper, and something vaguely like dried lizard scales. The medieval marketplace greets you like a traveling carnival of remedies, where every stall promises miracles wrapped in silk and dusted with mystery. Here, medicine isn't about prayer or balance, it's about prestige and exotic imports. You drift among merchants in bright robes, their voices rising above the clamor of hooves on cobblestones. A man waves a packet of saffron under your nose, its golden threads glowing like captured sunlight. He claims it will cure your cough, brighten your mood, and why not make you more appealing to the opposite sex? You wonder if it also pays the rent, because at this price it probably should. Next, you're shown jars of ground ivory, precious and pale, sold by weight like flour. Wealthy customers scoop it up eagerly, convinced that powdered tusk could mend bones or soothe fevers. You imagine noblemen sprinkling it over their wine like some decadent spice, boasting to their friends about their ivory-enhanced vitality. Never mind that an elephant had to pay the price for their indigestion. Remedy, but the real spectacle comes when a merchant unfurls a bundle of dried snakes. The brittle coils are displayed proudly, like jewels strung on invisible threads. He swears that when ground to powder and mixed with wine, the serpent grants strength and wards off poison. You can't help but chuckle at the irony. Drinking snake to avoid being poisoned sounds like medieval logic at its finest. It's the same reasoning that probably invented pineapple on pizza. Exotic imports were not rare in these bustling trade hubs, spices from the East, resins from Arabia, strange stones from Africa carried with them both a healing reputation and the glamour of distance. In a world where local herbs and broths felt humble, these foreign goods glowed with promise, precisely because they came from far away. After all, medicine always seems more convincing if it has to cross an ocean first. One lesser-known truth is that many of these imports were fakes or adulterated. Peppercorns padded with pebbles, saffron dyed with marigold petals, ivory replaced with chalk. Merchants knew that nobles, eager to show off their wealth and supposed wisdom, wouldn't notice or wouldn't admit noticing that their miracle cure tasted suspiciously like garden dirt. Buying exotic medicine was as much about displaying your status as it was about improving your health, and yet not all of it was pure nonsense. Some spices, like cinnamon and clove, did help preserve food or ease digestion. Certain resins had mild antiseptic qualities. The problem was, doses were never measured and effects were wildly inconsistent. So, while your stomachache might fade, it was just as likely that your wallet would ache even more. Historians still debate whether these exotic remedies were truly believed to be powerful, or if they were simply luxury items masquerading as cures. Were nobles genuinely convinced that a pinch of ivory powder healed their lungs? Or did they enjoy the theatre of ether, performance of showing that they could afford what common folk could not? Perhaps both. Medicine here was not only about healing, but about spectacle, a way of staging one's place in the grand drama of wealth and power. You watch a nobleman's servant carry away a pouch of powdered snake, while the merchant grins and counts his coins. The nobleman will sip it later, grimacing at the taste but reassuring himself that the bitterness proves its potency. And when his cough lingers, he will buy twice as much next week, because obviously the stars or the dosage or the timing wasn't quite right. It's easy to laugh now, to shake your head at people spending fortunes on dried reptiles and tusk dust. But then you glance around the stalls of a modern health store and realize humanity hasn't changed much. Swap the snake for powdered collagen and the ivory for some obscure mushroom, and suddenly medieval and modern sound suspiciously alike. Still, there's something enchanting about this market, the colors, the fragrances, the shimmering promise that somewhere among these jars lies the secret to strength, to longevity, maybe even to immortality. You inhale the sharp bite of pepper in the air, feel the dry crunch of herbs beneath your fingers, and realize that hope itself is half the medicine here. The market begins to fade into dusk. Lanterns glowing amber against the deepening sky. Merchants lower their voices, offering last-minute bargains to those desperate enough to believe. You tuck away a sprig of saffron, not because you think it will cure you, but because in its golden threads you see something alluring an escape, a story, a promise whispered across seas. As you step away, the sounds of the crowd melt into the distance, leaving you with the quiet certainty that medicine, whether in prayer halls or marketplaces, has always been as much about belief as about cure. And in that twilight moment, you feel suspended between both the sacred chant of the monk and the sly grin of the merchant, each offering their own brand of comfort. The lively murmur of the spice market fades, and suddenly the scents of cinnamon and saffron are replaced by the iron temps of blood and the acrid smoke of burning cloth. You find yourself in a wooden chamber that feels part workshop, part stage. A man lies on a table, pale as wax, his teeth gritted. Around him, villagers lean in, not out of pity, but out of morbid fascination. Surgery in this world is not whispered behind sterile curtains. It is spectacle, raw and unfiltered. The surgeon, if you can call him that, sharpens his knife on a whetstone. The sound alone makes your jaw tighten, like chalk dragged across slate. He pours strong ale into the patient's mouth, a poor substitute for anesthesia. When the man gags on the bitterness, someone shoves a stick between his teeth. Bite down, they tell him, as though splintered wood could distract from the reality of losing a limb. You stand close enough to see the trembling hands of the patient clutching the table, knuckles white as the blade makes its first decisive cut. There is no gentle countdown, no soothing assurance. just the sound of wood creaking under his grip and the murmured prayers of onlookers. The knife carves quick and sure because it must. Speed is mercy in this world. The faster the cut, the greater the chance the patient will remain among the living when it's done. A bucket sits beneath the table, already darkened with blood. The surgeon works with brisk efficiency, his apron stained with the memory of countless other bodies. When the limb is finally severed, the next step comes. Swiftly, cauterization. A heated iron rod, glowing dull red, is pressed to the wound. The sizzle of flesh fills the room like cooking meat on a summer grill. You almost expect someone to ask for seasoning. The smell is sharp, choking, but the bleeding stops if the patient doesn't faint first. This is a familiar scene to many. In the Middle Ages, amputation, cauterization, even trepanning, the drilling of holes into skulls to release bad humors, were all performed without anesthesia, relying on alcohol, distraction, or sheer willpower. Pain wasn't avoided, it was endured. After all, what choice did anyone have? When infection crept into a wound, amputation was often the only hope. Grim as it was, a lesser-known fact is that these surgeries were often public events. People crowded in, not to help, but to watch. It was education for apprentices, gossip for neighbors, and morbid entertainment for those with nothing better to do on a Tuesday. In a sense, the surgeon was both healer and performer, judged not only by survival rates, but by the elegance and speed of his movements. The more dramatic the procedure, the larger the crowd. Who needs theatre when you have a man with a sore and a shaky patient? Historians still debate how effective these surgeries truly were. Some argue that, crude as they seem, fast amputations saved many lives from infection. Others point out that the lack of hygiene, the same knife used on one man, might be wiped on an apron and plunged into the next men. Death was often delayed rather than prevented. What is clear is that for every life saved, many others were lost to sepsis, shock, or the sheer brutality of the experience. You can't help but imagine yourself on that table, the sweat dripping into your eyes, the raw terror in your chest, the taste of wood as you bite down, the surgeon telling you, perhaps cheerfully, to hold still as if you were merely sitting for a haircut. And then the silence that follows, broken only by ragged breathing and the clink of metal being cleaned for the next patient. If you thought your last dentist visit was bad, well, at least no one handed you a stick and a pint of ale. Yet, in the middle of all this horror, there is resilience. Some patients did survive, healed slowly, and even returned to work. Villagers sometimes called them the lucky ones, their scars proof of survival in a world stacked against them. You can almost picture them limping back to the marketplace weeks later, sharing grim jokes about how they left part of themselves on the surgeon's table. The smell of blood lingers, but as you watch, the surgeon steps back, wiping his brow. The crowd disperses, murmuring, some shaking their heads, others oddly exhilarated. The patient lies weak but alive, his fate uncertain, his life now in the hands of time and luck. You take one last look at the glowing iron, resting in the ashes like a demon tamed for just a moment, and you feel the heavy weight of how fragile survival was in these times. The memory of saffron and cinnamon from the marketplace drifts back faintly, as though mocking the harsh reality before you. Luxury for some, agony for others, both considered medicine, both wrapped in hope. And so you step away from the surgeon's chamber, the sounds of the crowd fading, carrying with you the echo of steel against bone and the uneasy thought that sometimes the cure felt just as cruel as the disease. The echoes of steel and smoke from the surgeon's chamber still clung to you. But as you step outside into the village air, you find yourself in a quieter corner of medieval medicine, one not marked by knives and cauterized wounds, but by whispered knowledge passed from mother to daughter, from midwife to apprentice. Here, in kitchens dimly lit by hearth fires, medicine belongs to women. You watch a midwife prepare for a birth. Her hands are steady, her eyes sharp, though no university diploma hangs on her wall. She does not need one. Her authority comes from years of watching, helping, listening, and, most importantly, succeeding where others might have failed. Around her, bundles of dried herbs hang low from rafter sage, pennyroyal, and rosemary, giving the air a sharp, earthy fragrance that almost masks the tension of the room. A woman in labor groans nearby, and you realize quickly there's no crowd here. No applause like in the surgeon's shop, only the urgent intimacy of survival. Midwives are the quiet backbone of healthcare in these times. Everyone knows them. Everyone needs them, and yet, ironically, everyone also fears them a little. After all, childbirth is dangerous, fever can turn sudden, and when survival does not come, it is easy for whispers to begin. If the patient dies, was it bad luck, or was the healer meddling with powers she shouldn't have? You sense that the line between trusted guardian and suspected, which is perilously thin. A lesser-known truth is that many midwives carried not just herbs and charms, but also knowledge of practical surgery. When complications arose, some could cut cords, stitch tears, or even grim as it sounds, perform rudimentary operations to save a mother's life. These were not official doctors, yet their hands shaped the survival of countless families. Strange how women without licenses often carried more experience than the men who wrote the textbooks. The midwife you're watching moves with calm precision. She lays a warm cloth across the sweating mother's forehead, murmuring words that are part prayer, part encouragement. She places a small amulet under the pillow knot, because she truly believes it will keep evil spirits away, but because the mother does, and belief itself can be medicine. You realize that her healing is equal parts skill and comfort, a balancing act of science, superstition, and emotional strength. And yes, the remedies sometimes sound creative. A fever might be treated with willow bark tea, which we now know actually contained the basis of aspirin. That's a win. But the same fever might also be chased away with charms written on scraps of parchment, or by tying a toad around the neck. Not exactly FDA approved. You imagine trying to explain that to a modern pharmacist. Hi, yes, can I get my prescription filled? It's one live amphibian, preferably small, with a sturdy rope, thanks. Historians still debate just how much of this knowledge was truly effective versus coincidental. Some argue that midwives and wise women preserved practical remedies that genuinely worked, their herbal knowledge forming the foundation of later medicine. Others suggest their cures were mostly placebos, rituals wrapped around a core of hope. What no one doubts, however, is that these women filled a role society couldn't do without. Even if society never fully acknowledged it, the contradictions continue. Villagers call them in secret when fevers run high, when a child's cough won't stop, when a woman's labor stretches into dangerous hours. Yet in daylight, these same villagers sometimes cross the street rather than greet them, muttering about unnatural knowledge or dark arts. The irony is almost comedic until you remember that accusations of witchcraft were not jokes, but potential death sentences. Healing made you essential, but it also made you vulnerable. You watch now as the midwife ties off the cord, wipes the newborn clean, and places the infant into its mother's trembling arms. The room exhales as though it too has been holding its breath. A cry fills the air, sharp and insistent, reminding you that life has forced its way through again, with the help of steady hands and whispered chants. In the corner, a young apprentice scribbles notes on a scrap of parchment, eager to learn the patterns of herbs and timing. You think, perhaps this is how medicine truly survives, not in ivory towers, but in kitchens, in hidden corners, in the strength of women who refuse to let others slip away without a fight. There's even humor here, subtle and wry. The midwife scolds the father, who fainted halfway through the ordeal, calling him as useless as a sheep in a church. You smile, because honestly, nothing changes. Men have been fainting at childbirth for centuries, and probably still will. Someone else jokes that if the baby grows up healthy, they'll owe the midwife a chicken. If not, well, she might get blamed for brewing storms. Payment, praise, suspicion, it's all tangled together, and she carries it with weary grace. As you leave the room, the cries of the newborn still ringing in your ears, you sense the immense weight these women bore, neither fully celebrated nor entirely safe. They walked a narrow path between reverence and fear, their craft both blessed and cursed, and yet their work kept villages alive. Without them, mothers and children would have faced even grimmer odds, and the quiet rhythm of life would have faltered. The smell of herbs lingers on your clothes as you step back into the night. The image of the midwife stays with you, her figure framed by firelight, her shadow stretching across the walls like both guardian and ghost. You know the road ahead will take you deeper into the strange contradictions of medieval medicine, where faith and fear are stitched together as tightly as a wound on a surgeon's table. The cries of the newborn and the scent of rosemary fade behind you as you're ushered from the cramped cottages of midwives into the polished marble halls of power. Here, healing does not smell of herbs or sound like whispered prayers. It gleams in gold cups and glitters from jeweled amulets that dangle on the chests of kings and queens. You step quietly, though it hardly matters. Royal remedies are meant to impress, not to be kept secret. A king sits slouched on his throne, his complexion pale, his eyes watery from a stubborn cough. Instead of being handed willow bark tea or a poultice of garlic, he's offered a goblet filled with a shimmering liquid. The court physician calls it an elixir of strength, infused with saffron, pearls ground to dust, and if you believe his hushed whisper, a few drops of distilled gold. The king sips, grimaces, and pretends it tastes like health. You know better, it probably tastes like licking a metal fence on a hot day. You notice that the queen, beside him, wears a necklace strung with carved stones, each etched with symbols meant to ward off disease. It's a heavy chain, more jewelry than medicine, but she fingers it nervously every time the king coughs. It strikes you as endearingly human. Even at the top of society, people cling to small tokens for comfort, as if wealth can bend fate into submission. Everyone knows the grand image of royal healing, the touch of the monarch said to cure scrofula or the king's evil. Thousands lined up for this ceremony, desperate for a brush of the royal hand. The common story paints it as divine proof, as if the king's skin carried God's fingerprint. But a lesser-known truth, not all monarchs enjoyed this duty. Some dreaded the long lines of coughing, swollen-necked subjects, their touch demanded again and again. One diary notes a king trying to rush through the process, practically patting heads like livestock. So much for sacred grace. Historians still debate whether these ceremonies were more political theatre than medical act. Were they genuine attempts at healing or carefully staged shows to reinforce the mystique of monarchy? You watch the king touch a trembling peasant's forehead, his rings flashing in the candlelight, and you wonder if anyone truly believed in this moment or if belief was simply required by survival. The palace corridors reveal stranger cures, yet you glimpse jars filled with powdered unicorn horn, which in reality is likely narwhal tusk imported at obscene prices. You also see dried snakes curled in glass, and one particularly impressive container labeled as mummy dust. Yes, actual ground-up remains of ancient bodies shipped from Egypt, stirred into tonics for the nobility. You hesitate, suddenly. Grateful your own remedies so far have involved nothing more alarming than willow bark, tea, or a toad necklace. One courtier whispers proudly of another secret, rubies steeped in wine, believed to fortify the blood. You imagine explaining that at a dinner party. Yes, thank you. I'll take my Cabernet with 2 rubies. Please, and maybe a slice of lemon. You have to admire the creativity. After all, when you have bottomless coffers, why stop at herbs? When you can drink gemstones. And yet, beneath the extravagance, there's the same fear you saw in village kitchens. The queen clutches her amulet. The king swallows his glittering draughts. The walls may be gilded, but disease slips through. Locked gates as easily as through cottage doors. Plague shows no deference to crowns. Fever does not bow. You drift into the royal apothecary, where rows of shelves hold imported spices, cinnamon, cloves, and nutmeg, touted as both luxury and cure. Their warm scents swirl together, a reminder that trade routes carried not only silk and gold, but also the promise of health wrapped in mystery. You trail your fingers across jars until you stop at one filled with dried frogs, lined up as neatly as soldiers. A label claims they can cure epilepsy if worn in a pouch at the waist. You raise a brow. Well, at least the frogs got a promotion from pond life to high society accessory. 3 jokes float through your thoughts like lazy feathers. First, you can't help noticing that royal remedies sound like a shopping list written by someone wandering aimlessly in both a jewelry store and a pet shop. Second, the king's physician, who wears a smug smile after handing over powdered pearls, looks suspiciously like a man who's about to retire early to his country estate. And third, you imagine modern dentists staring in horror at the queen chewing on ground ivory, muttering, "This is why we can't have nice teeth." Still, amid the absurdity, there's something touching. You watch the royal children dart around the hall, each with a tiny amulet tied to their wrists to ward off the pox. You sense their parents' desperation. If wealth, faith, and superstition are the only tools they have, then they will spend all 3 lavishly to shield their heirs. You realize that from humble midwives to gilded kings, medicine in this era is not a matter of status, but of fear. Everyone, whether clutching a sprig of sage or a pearl-studded goblet, wants the same fragile promise: protection. And as you leave the echoing hall, the image of glittering elixirs lingers like a half-remembered dream suite, strange and just, a little unsettling. Ahead, beyond the palace gates, the world of remedies grows darker still, where not just herbs or jewels, but rituals and charms are wielded against unseen forces. And you are about to step into that twilight realm. You step away from the palace halls and their glittering goblets, and the air cools into something humbler, denser with the smell of wood smoke and onions frying. Out here, The remedies are not made of pearls or crushed rubies, but of whatever can be tugged from the garden, scraped from a wall, or scooped from a pig. You walk into a cottage, la-roofed, smoky, warm with the presence of too many bodies and too little space, and you feel the pulse of ordinary life, its illnesses and its stubborn, homegrown cures. A woman sits by the hearth, her child's forehead slick with fever. She presses a poultice of raw onion against his skin, the sharp scent rising like a terror-inducing cloud. The idea is simple. The onion, pungent and alive with bite, will draw out the sickness. You crouch near and feel the sting in your eyes. Whether the fever lifts or not, at least the family can say they cried together in solidarity. You see another figure, an older man wrapping his swollen ankle with a bandage of moss pulled fresh from the stone wall outside. It's damp, cool, almost soothing. Everyone knows moss holds water, and in this household, that fact alone elevates it into a healer. Later, someone will claim the moss breathes out healing vapors. You wonder if that's true, or if the poor man simply finds it comforting to believe that the green fuzz, doing its best to choke a wall, can also nurse a joint back to health. Common knowledge in these villages runs thick with recipes like these. Pig fat ointments mixed with herbs smeared over cuts, soot rubbed into aching teeth, even spider webs tucked into wounds as makeshift bandages. It all feels improvised, stubborn, almost charming in its insistence. If you look closely, you notice that every cottage has its own variations, passed down like family heirlooms. Aunt Margaret swears by nettle tea, while old Thomas insists on burying a potato to cure warts. And here lies a lesser-known truth. Some of these simple fixes actually worked better than the gilded concoctions of kings. Onion poultices, for instance, do have mild antibacterial properties. Spider webs can act like a primitive gauze, sticky and clotting. But don't get too comfortable. Pig fat ointment is just as likely to attract stray dogs as it is to heal a wound. Historians still debate whether these remedies were rooted more in practicality or in sheer superstition. Did people choose moss and onions because they worked, or because they had nothing else? You think perhaps it was both. In a world where access to doctors meant distance, coin, or both, the humble kitchen became the pharmacy, and belief was as much a part of the cure as the poultice itself. A boy offers you a mug of garlic-infused ale, brewed not for taste, but for health. You sip and nearly cough. It's like drinking liquid fire with a flavor that could ward off more than disease, maybe even your friends. Someone chuckles, saying it's good for keeping away the plague and unwanted suitors alike. A 2-for-1 bargain. Another joke rises as you glance at the moss bandage. You can't help thinking that this patient has essentially paid good faith for a free landscaping service. His ankle may heal, but the stone wall outside is definitely bald in one spot. And then there's the pig fat ointment, shimmering slightly in a clay pot near the fire. You imagine explaining this to a modern dermatologist. Yes, doctor, I just lathered on some bacon grease. Seemed natural. The horrified pause would be priceless. And yet, beneath the laughter, there's resilience here. These families cannot summon physicians by candlelight or send servants to fetch spices from afar. What they have is what they can gather, grind, or scrape together. And when the fever breaks, or the wound closes, they remember. And they believe again in the humble power of their hearth. You lie back, listening to the muffled sounds of this small world, the crackle of the fire, the hiss of boiling water, the faint murmur of someone chanting a charm under their breath as they stir an herbal brew. The ordinary is transformed into a ritual where onion, moss, and pig fat carry more than practical weight, they carry hope. The door creaks, and a neighbor enters, arms full of herbs, whispering of another kind of protection, one that blends the line between healing and faith. You sense the story is about to turn toward charms and blessings, where medicine is not just scraped from walls or dug from gardens, but called down from higher powers. You leave behind the smoky cottages with their onions and moss poultices, and you step into a quieter world, one where the smell is not pig fat but ink, parchment, and candle wax. Here the medicine is written down, line after line, by hands. That cramp from endless copying. You sit beside a monk, bent over his desk, his quill scratching softly, the rhythm steady, like a heartbeat stretched thin across the night. The room glows faintly from a single candle, and shadows stretch across shelves stacked with books, so rare they're treated almost like relics. Everyone knows that knowledge travels slowly in this world. There are no printing presses yet, no shelves of shiny textbooks. Instead, each medical text exists because someone like this monk, half blind from the effort, copied it by hand. You watch his fingers smudge the margins, leaving little fingerprints that, in some strange way, are as important to the survival of medicine as the recipes themselves. When the book is finally finished, maybe months later, it will be carried along muddy roads to another monastery, another healer, another desperate patient. You lean closer and catch a glimpse of the contents, remedies that feel familiar, like honey for sore throats, or wine to clean wounds. Those sound reasonable enough, and you almost nod in relief. But then your eye drifts down the page and lands on stranger ideas like swallowing powdered emerald to calm indigestion, or smearing ground-up worms onto the skin to soothe fevers. You blink. Yes, that's exactly what it says. And no, you don't get a refund if it doesn't work. The lesser-known truth is that many of these texts were not pure medicine, but hybrids, part science, part myth, part borrowed wisdom from centuries past. A single book might contain Galen's theories of humors next to an incantation invoking saints, followed by a recipe involving pigeon droppings. To the medieval mind, none of this felt contradictory. Healing could come from God, from nature, or from a particularly unlucky pigeon. Why not cover all your bases? Historians still debate how much these manuscripts advanced medicine versus how much they just preserved old mistakes. Were they life-saving storehouses of knowledge, or simply elaborate echo chambers, copying the same errors across generations? You picture scholars arguing in dusty libraries, frowning over marginal notes, like trying not to kill the patient this time. You imagine yourself as a student handed one of these books, carefully bound in leather. The smell of old vellum rises, like a ghost. You read earnestly, only to stumble across instructions that feel more like a recipe for a very strange dinner party. Take the gall of a bull, mix it with wine, and apply to the eyes. You shut the book slowly, reconsidering your life choices. If nothing else, at least the wine might make you forget the bull's gall. There's a quiet comedy in it, really. Someone, somewhere, wrote these remedies down with the same seriousness you'd expect from a modern medical journal. No emojis, no disclaimers, just the calm certainty that powdered gemstones belong in your digestive system. You can't help but laugh softly. It's as if medieval healers were playing a centuries-long game of truth or dare, and everyone kept choosing dare. But in the flickering light, you sense something almost beautiful. These manuscripts carried not only bizarre cures, but also fragments of genuine learning, translations of ancient Greek texts, notes from Arab physicians, herbal lists carefully illustrated with colored inks. They were attempts, however clumsy, to make sense of the fragile body, to wrestle with illness using pen and prayer alike. They are proof that even when the remedies sound ridiculous, the human desire to preserve knowledge remains serious, stubborn, enduring. You run your finger over a margin where a tired monk doodled a tiny dragon, as though even he knew the pages needed a little whimsy. Maybe he wanted future readers to smile between recipes for worm paste and emerald powder. And maybe you do smile, because across the centuries, you've shared a small joke with a stranger who, like you, was just trying to stay awake through another long night. As you lean back, the candle guttering low, the monk closes his book with reverence, placing it gently on the pile. Outside, the night deepens, and the hum of village life fades into silence. You sense that these texts, for all their oddities, will continue their slow journey, copied and recopied, whispered and read, giving hope to those who crave it most. And yet, in the hush of this scriptorium, you hear murmurs of change. The quill scratches might one day give way to faster tools, spreading ideas not in decades, but in days. For now, though, you remain in this world of candlelit copying, of ink-stained fingers, of wisdom both profound and profoundly odd. The door creaks softly, and you catch a glimpse of another figure entering, carrying not parchment, but dried herbs, exotic and strange, brought from faraway lands. Their scent promises the next chapter in your wandering where medicine arrives not from pen and ink, but from ships and markets, where the remedies smell more of spice than of bull gall. You step out from the script-covered room, your fingers still faintly smudged with ink, and into another chamber where the air feels different, less of parchment and more of incense, beeswax, and something you can't quite name. Here, medicine is not confined to lines of text. Instead, it hums in the air as charms dangle from rafters, relics gleam in little cases, and whispered spells ride along with the smoke curling toward the rafters. You breathe it in, and whether you like it or not, you feel just a little bewitched. It's common knowledge that medieval healers leaned on both prayer and practice. If you were ill, you might receive a poultice of herbs for your skin, while someone recited a blessing over your head. Both were considered essential, as though the fever in your body needed chamomile on one side and divine intervention on the other. You lie back on a rough straw mattress, and a healer drapes a charm around your neck, a tiny cross, a bone fragment, or maybe a smooth stone etched with symbols. You're told this will keep away the illness. Does it? Well, let's just say you don't exactly get a warranty card with it. The lesser-known truth is that many of these charms weren't just random trinkets. They often blended local folk beliefs with sacred relics. A scrap of cloth said to have brushed against a saint's body, a vial of water from a holy spring, even a chicken bone carved into shapes, all of it had its place. And if you're wondering how one tells a real saint's relic from, say, an especially shiny pebble, so were many medieval buyers. The line between miracle and marketplace was thin, and yes, sometimes suspiciously profitable. You notice that, alongside these charms, actual observation was sneaking in. Healers took note of pulse, urine color, the way a wound changed over time. They wrote things down, they compared cases, yet somehow, in the very same breath, they'd also mutter an incantation meant to banish evil spirits. It's as if they were trying every door, hoping one would finally open. Historians still debate whether this strange marriage of superstition and science slowed down progress or quietly paved the way for it. Was all the spell work just wasted breath? Or did it create a space where observation and experimentation could coexist with belief? You imagine modern doctors in lab coats frowning over this, one muttering, "Well, the urine chart is sound, but did we really need to summon St. Agnes?" There's a kind of gentle comedy in it too. Picture a healer examining your tongue with the seriousness of a surgeon, then immediately tying a charm of garlic cloves around your neck, nodding sagely. You can't help but think, maybe it wasn't the garlic scaring away spirits, but rather scaring away other people who didn't want to catch your garlic breath. At least it bought you some personal space. Another little joke hides in the relic trade. Some churches claimed to have so many fragments of the true cross that you'd wonder if medieval carpentry shops had gone into overdrive, and yet people carried those splinters, believing fiercely in their power. Perhaps the belief itself offered more healing than the object. Sometimes faith is the medicine, and the relic is just the packaging. But even with the laughter, you sense something earnest. Here you watch a mother pressing a charm into her child's hand, whispering a prayer with eyes closed tight. You see a monk carefully cataloguing herbs, while also recording the proper verse to say while grinding them. To them there was no contradiction. The world was thick with mysteries, and health could be swayed by heaven, earth, or the spaces in between. Why not enlist them all? The flicker of candlelight softens the relics and charms into something almost tender. They represent fear, yes, but also hope. They are reminders that human beings, when confronted with suffering, reach in every direction for comfort. And though we smile now at their garlic necklaces and worm powders, you realize that beneath it all was the same impulse that drives medicine today. A deep desire to keep someone alive a little longer, to ease pain, to restore breath as the candles gutter lower. The murmur of prayers fades into silence, and you step back into the cool night. The stars are bright above you, and you think of how medieval physicians once traced those very stars to guide their treatments, convinced the heavens dictated the body. Perhaps the charms and relics were not enough, so eyes turned upward to the constellations, where answers shimmered faintly in the dark. The night sky seems to beckon you toward that next chapter, where sickness and healing are mapped not on parchment or bone, but on the canvas of the universe itself. You step into a chamber where the first thing to strike you isn't the sight of instruments or the murmur of prayers, but the smell. Thick, sharp, and unavoidable, it floods your senses. Rosemary sprigs smolder gently on the hearth, vinegar splashes into bowls, and somewhere, tar bubbles and spits with its acrid bite. It clings to your skin, your clothes, your very breath. You don't just smell it, you wear it. And in the strange logic of medieval medicine, that's a kind of therapy everyone knew, or at least believed that disease traveled through foul air. So naturally, the solution was to fight stench with stench. If plague was in the breeze, you masked it with something stronger. You're told to wave a rosemary branch under your nose or soak cloths in vinegar before pressing them to your face. The idea is simple. If your nose burns, surely the sickness cannot get through. Never mind that your eyes water and you sneeze loud enough to scare the neighborhood dog. The lesser-known detail is that burning tar wasn't just a random choice. Tar fires were lit in the streets, their oily smoke rolling through alleys, meant to push back the invisible miasma believed to carry illness. Whole towns sometimes smelled like a shipyard on fire, and if you've ever been stuck behind a car burning oil. You know the sensation, though. At least medieval folks didn't have traffic jams to add to the misery. You stand in the thick of it, the smoke prickling your eyes, and you wonder, is this really helping? Historians still debate whether these strong smells had any medical benefit at all. Maybe some herbs had mild antiseptic qualities, but could rosemary branches truly stand between you and a plague? Or was it all theatre, a kind of scented placebo? That gave people courage to step outside their doors. And there is humour, too, hidden in the haze. Imagine neighbours competing over whose house smells the most protected. One family burns vinegar-soaked rags, while next door someone waves resinous pine, and across the way a fellow goes all in with buckets of tar. The result? A street that smells like a salad gone up in flames. You'd almost prefer the original. Stench of disease, almost. Another chuckle sneaks in when you picture a medieval patient being told to sip vinegar as medicine. They grimace, swallow, and probably think, well, if the illness doesn't leave, at least my appetite will. You half expect someone to invent a medieval cookbook called 100 Ways to Ruin Dinner with Vinegar. Yet, beneath the comedy, you sense a strange tenderness. Healers didn't always know what they were doing, but they tried to offer comfort through scent. A bunch of rosemary by a sick bed wasn't just protection, it was reassurance. A sign that someone cared enough to believe you were worth defending against invisible dangers. Smells, after all, stick to memory. Perhaps the fragrance of herbs reminded people of gardens, kitchens, and safety, anchoring them while the world spun with fear. The truth is that the smell of healing was often stronger than the healing itself. You breathe it in, cough, and then breathe again. And you realize that to medieval minds, this was half the battle, convincing yourself you were defended. The body, tricked or soothed, sometimes played along. And if not, well, at least your last moments were filled with rosemary instead of rot. The smoke curls higher, blending with candlelight and the hush of night prayers outside. You step back into the air, carrying the scents with you, and glance at the sky. Soon, the stars themselves will become doctors, charted and read, their patterns mapped onto the fragile bodies below. And with that thought, you continue forward, ready to see how belief in healing drifted not just through herbs and smells, but through the constellations themselves. The day tapers off slowly, like the last ember on a dying log. You sit in a small, dim chamber, the smoky air now heavy with silence more than sense. Healers shuffle away, robes smelling faintly of vinegar and herbs, their hands tired from grinding. Mixing, blessing, patients sink into straw mattresses, bodies aching, but more from exhaustion than from expectation of recovery. You can feel it, the whole room sighing together, surrender not to healing, but to sleep. There is no certainty here. Every cure you've been offered, every charm whispered at your bedside, every draught of bitter potion still lingers in your mind. Did any of it really help? Or was it just another story wrapped around your fever, another hope tucked into your hands like a rosary bead? No one knows. Historians still debate whether medieval treatments offered more placebo than cure, whether the care mattered more than the science. Yet as you watch faces soften in the glow of candlelight, you realize the outcome mattered less than the comfort. The lesser-known truth is that sleep itself was sometimes prescribed as medicine. Physicians wrote about it, monks prayed for it, and families guarded it like treasure. In a world with no anesthetics, no antibiotics, no real shield against plague, sleep was the closest thing to a universal remedy. If you woke up, perhaps you were spared if you didn't. Well, at least it was gentle. There's something hauntingly beautiful about that sleep, as the last and truest balm. You stretch your legs beneath a coarse blanket, listening to the faint creak of timber above and the murmurs of others settling down. Outside, the streets grow quiet, the carts gone, only the wind carrying a hint of tar smoke from earlier fires. Inside, breath falls into rhythm, steady, heavy, like waves against a distant shore. You almost forget the wounds, the boils, the leeches, the prayers. You almost believe that, just for now, the world is safe. A light joke slips in as you imagine the healer himself collapsing onto his cot. He spent all day telling others to chew garlic, bleed a little, or wave rosemary around, and now he snores, louder than the town bell. You think maybe his patients didn't die from their illnesses. They died from sheer boredom listening to his instructions. And when someone in the corner dreams of wine instead of vinegar, you almost laugh, but the sound fades before it escapes your lips. The truth is, the lines blur here at the end of the day. Faith, medicine, fear, hope, they all dissolve into the hush of slumber. The crackle of fire weakens, the last candle sputters, and you find yourself sinking as though drawn down into the very straw beneath you. No resistance, no fight, just the sweet weight of letting go. And now, as your eyes grow heavy, the story itself begins to quiet. You've walked through herbs and humours, barber surgeons and burning tar, queens with amulets and peasants with onions. You've seen remedies that comforted and ones that likely harmed. And yet, the thread through it all was human. The desperate need to do something, anything, when faced with the unknown. So you allow yourself to drift, carried by that same need, not for knowledge now, but for rest. The candles fade into stars, the smells into dreams, the whispers into silence. The world shrinks to the softness beneath your cheek and the slow rhythm of your breathing. Sleep takes you the way it once took them, healer and patient alike, and as your thoughts scatter, tender as dust in moonlight, I'll leave you with nothing more than this soft farewell. May you find comfort in your own rest, more certain than any medieval cure, more precious than any charm. Let the night hold you. Let the quiet keep you. Let the story fade into hush. End of script. Sweet dreams.